Welcome, everyone. And I'm going to wait one more minute to allow people who are still logging in to get in, and we'll begin. Okay, well, we're going to get started. It's 2 minutes after, and we want to appreciate everyone's time for joining us today. And again, another welcome to our presentation today on the topic of developing a MEWP Specific Safe-Use Program, or system of work as it may be referred to in certain standards. This is part of our series of webinars that are being developed and delivered by the IPAF North American Regional Council. And it is in support of our goal to support mobile elevated work platform users meeting their responsibilities. My name is Tony Grote. I am IPAF North America's Regional Manager, and I am also the chairman of the ANSI SAIA A92.22 Safe Use Standard and the Canadian CSA B354.7 Safe Use Standard. There is a button that you can see for Q&A. It's a feature on this platform, so that if you have questions that develop during the course of the presentation, please enter them in, and we will try to address as many questions as we can at the end of today's presentation. We would very much like to thank our sponsors who support making these presentations possible and available for free for all of you to utilize, both Skyjack and TVH Parts, and hopefully all of you will support them in the future as part of their supporting us in these presentations. And now we'd like to show a short video from Skyjack. Okay, thank you for Skyjack, great video, and to TVH as well. Regardless of your viewpoint on ANSI standards or the Canadian standards being voluntary, these standards represent the consensus ideas of the mobile elevated work platform industry. All MEWPs are designed and manufactured to be compliant with these standards, and manufacturers reference them in their operations manuals. They offer the most current industry guidance for the design, safe use, and training for this equipment. No one in the industry considers them to be voluntary. And our focus today is going to be on the ANSI A92.22 and Canadian CSA B354 safe use standards, both of them developed off of the foundation of the ISO 16368 International Safe Use Standard. It applies to all types, sizes of MEWPs. It covers all MEWPs operations, including loading, unloading, inspecting, sales, demonstrations, training, performing work tasks. Any form of use or operations are covered under these standards. The roadmap to safety is not being lucky. Being lucky is not an effective approach to the safe use of these products, and all know too well that things do not always go as planned. Workplace hazards are inevitable, especially when working at height, where falls are the #1 cause of workplace accidents. Having a safe workplace must rely on adequate planning and implementation of your plan. The construction workplace fatalities continue to rise, reaching a 12-year high in 2019, and the industry fatal injury rate also turned upward according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, showing that the private sector construction fatalities climbed in 2019 by about 5%. Each fatality represents a loved one lost to mostly controllable hazards on job sites. For all industries and governmental bodies, the Bureau reports that the number of fatal injuries rose 2% in 2019 for a total of 5,333, the highest annual level since 2019. IPAF has been maintaining MEWP accident statistics for many years. As you can read from this chart of lost time incidents between 2016 and 2018, falls from platforms, electrocutions, entrapments, and MEWP overturns are the 4 most common causes of fatalities when using a mobile elevated work platform. However, you can see that there are many other issues that must be considered in your safe use planning. So how are you protecting against these known hazards? These pictures, unfortunately, are too easily obtained in the marketplace, and they demonstrate the need for planning and implementation of a MEWP specific safe use program. None of these pictures resulted in a reportable accident, fortunately, but accident-free is not necessarily the measurement of a safe workplace, as evidenced in these pictures. Not having a clear safety program greatly increases the risk of an accident occurring, as potentially dangerous actions can and do occur when the focus is on the task without evaluating the risk or implementing proper safe use procedures. It's too easy to forget about the risk when it's easier to just get things done. A good safe use plan that's easy to follow with safe use procedures will become your future standard operating procedures, common and repetitive by the workers, rather than workers trying to figure out each time as the situation arises what they should be doing. So really the question is, what is the risk management strategy for these companies? What should it be for you? Nothing happened here, so they don't need to do anything. What are they measuring? If it's only accidents and they don't have one, despite the fact that we see unsafe conditions, how are they going to stop them from reoccurring in the future and ultimately be exposed to these dangerous acts? Well, I need to really start with the foundation that MEWPs are one of the safest means to gain access to temporary work at height. There's no climbing to get to the work platform. It's fully guardrailed platform. It's mobile, movable on the site. There's ample platform sizes and capacities available for the task to be done, efficiently ready to do work when they arrive on the job. The improvements in designs have made these machines increasingly dependable and safe. But even well-designed machines like these, safety is reliant upon a safe use program to address the requirements for the application, inspections, training, maintenance, repairs, safe operation of this equipment on your sites. Users of mobile elevated work platforms, typically the employer of the MEWP operator, have a duty to provide their workers with a safe place of work, and the best assurance for that occurring is through proper planning and the execution of the plan. To ensure the safe operation of mobile elevated work platforms, the user must develop a MEWP Specific Safe-Use Program. The Safe-Use Program or system of work requires topics that must be included at a minimum, but the program must include all provisions of responsibilities for the employer, the user of the equipment. This diagram highlights the key topics, but the plan must include all of the responsibilities in what I'll call the buckets that you see around this cloud of what is included in the safe use plan. So how do we go about developing a safe use plan? Well, the IPAF North American Council is in the process of completing a guide with action steps and resources to assist all MEWP users in developing their MEWP specific safe use program. Here you see an outline of what that will look like. We have all the individual topics, the buckets, and within those action steps and resources for you to follow to develop your program. And today we're going to go through those topics one by one. So let's talk about the scope of planning. So while hazards apply to all, risk from hazards are not one size fits all. So your safe use plan most likely has to reflect those things that are particular to your operations. There are two categories of safe use programs for you to consider: formal and informal. And an example of a formal program is one that we're going to talk about today, which is one that is documented and provides standard operating procedures, method statements, and permits to work. An example of an informal program is verbal instructions from a qualified person that offers a list of do's and don'ts and acceptable practice and procedures for a particular application. Keep in mind that the more you define the safe use program will eliminate workers from creative solutions when they have to complete their task. If you use MEWPs once a year to change light bulbs versus using MEWPs daily or weekly on a construction site with all types of MEWPs and various tasks, your program needs may be very different. But regardless of the depth and breadth, a safe use program is needed. The level of risk for a task may require a formal program, while generally a short, easy, and simple operation may allow for an informal program or even a combination of both. Likely, the more detail, the more likely you will effectively get to your destination. The basic component of the safe use program is a risk assessment. And providing a workplace that is free from harm is a legal requirement. And the duty starts with the identification of potential hazards associated with the task being performed. This can be accomplished through the site risk assessment, the foundation of the safe use program, and there are several stages for a risk assessment that must be considered. The task to be performed, the location, and the timing of when that work is going to proceed. So in order to perform this risk assessment, we have to define what are the action steps. So the first one, as we stated, is the identification of the task and location. Within this, you have to have a description of the work to be performed with as much detail as possible. Consider all activities where the MEWP will be operated, from loading and unloading, inspections, demonstrations, or any form of use, to include start from your facility to your job sites. The second item is to identify the timing to be undertaken. So what does that have to do with it? Well, when is the work to be performed? It will be done in a day, a week, a month, a year. Will it happen this summer or the winter? Is there a deadline for completion? Will it happen during the day or at nighttime? Will weather conditions impact your work? So the timing that this will undertake will impact your risk assessment, because those all need to be considered. And when you identify the task and when you're going to be doing this, now you have to select the appropriate MEWP. And that has enough detail that we're going to go through that as a step within our safe use program. We also need to assess the risk associated with the task to identify control measures and the safe work procedures. Here we have awareness of the known MEWP potential hazards. So we have identified the major incidents that occur as were identified in the IPAF accident reporting data. And now we need to identify work procedures and measures to eliminate or lower the potential risk to an acceptable level from those potential hazards. We also need to be aware that we need to create a rescue plan, and that's detailed enough that we are going to have that as a standalone section within our safe use plan itself. We also need to identify the roles and responsibilities. So within MEWP Specific Plan, we end up having the user or the employer. We have a MEWP supervisor. We have MEWP operators. We have MEWP occupants, those who are not operators in the work platform. We have those people who are service technician, mechanics who are repairing the equipment, and all others who are associated in the work process or work area where the work will be performed. And lastly, we need to make sure that we communicate the results and complete ongoing reviews. So to determine how the results will be effectively communicated is a crucial part of having the plan, because a plan that sits on the shelf is an ineffective tool. So communicating it so that everyone can use it is a part of how your safe use program will be delivered. So associated with all those action steps, the program that we're trying to build, this guide, is also going to give you some resources. As we mentioned, you need to identify what the potential hazards are, and we end up having a link to the IPAF Global MEWP Safety Report. This report identifies known accidents that will require attention as known hazards that must be considered in your risk assessment. Some of them, as I stated earlier, may be less common than others, but you need to understand whether they apply to your particular work. Several years ago, the industry developed an industry best practice for risk assessments, which is a great tool to gain an understanding of the fundamentals for performing a risk assessment. And we have a link to that document within our resources. And it is developed as a MEWP specific risk assessment process. So there's lots of specific information that will apply to your risk assessment procedures. We ended up having the IPAF risk assessment template. So when you go out to each of your individual jobs, you can now have a form that you can complete to identify those particular hazards that are on site and the identification of the risk level that's there, and then the procedures to mitigate those risks. And then on an ongoing basis, each operator needs to complete a daily workplace inspection. So we have a daily workplace inspection checklist. That's a tool for the operators to follow and to apply the risk assessment in conjunction with their daily workplace inspections to ensure that all the risks are identified and proper control measures in place. So you can see here, there's a very complete process that your safe work program needs to address in the development of this plan. One thing that we find is not adequately addressed, unfortunately, because we find out that most people struggle when an accident occurs and a rescue is required, is a rescue plan. Rescue planning is a necessary component of the risk assessment because anytime that we're working at height, there's the risk of falls, and addressing any situation from being stranded at height due to machine malfunction, to a rescue from a fall, where proper planning can accommodate a prompt rescue that can make a very significant difference to the injury sustained, potentially the difference between life and death. The simple goal is to bring the occupants of the MEWP to the ground safely, and the plan must also consider the safeties of others in the process. Certain tasks and circumstances can require more extensive planning to ensure a safe and timely rescue. The ANSI A92.22 standard actually provides a framework that must be included in all of your rescue plans. So we have an outline for it. So what are our action steps? Well, first we need to analyze the hazards that could result in the platform being stranded. There are many ways that an occupant of the platform can become stranded. Loss of power in the machine itself, your entanglement of the platform with some type of structural item, an actual fall from the work platform where they're suspended in a fall arrest situation, and the list can go on. So you need to analyze what those potential hazards are and then create a plan for retrieving the worker in a timely manner. You have to consider all reasonable scenarios that may strand the workers. Resolve those solutions may include self-rescue, assisted rescue, and technical rescue. In many situations, the auxiliary power available from the platform on the ground controls will likely be the solution in most situations. But sometimes you're going to need to have some specialized equipment that may be appropriate. But in all cases, the workers need to be knowledgeable, trained, and willing to execute the plan. And we are going to be providing a planning guide and checklist and a guide on some specialized rescue equipment that can be utilized in your programs. We have to record your rescue plan in writing. You need to write down the rescue plan specific enough that others to assemble the resources and execute the recovery. We will provide that rescue plan template for your use. And then you need to disseminate and train all affected workers before operation. So your plan written down will come as part of your company's training manual. All occupants shall receive training that explains the procedures on if they fall or witness another person's fall, on how they will address doing that in an expeditious manner. So again, the safe rescue plan is a part of that. And we end up, again, now having a template for the rescue plan. We have The planning worksheet, which includes a list of consideration tools and examples of rescue plans, a guidance for the emergency rescue, a rescue plan toolbox talk that you can bring these up on an ongoing basis to keep your workers familiar with the importance of being fluent with the rescue plan. Well, here again, as part of that risk assessment is the selection of an appropriate MEWP. And here it is just not just the equipment itself, but it is all of the potential accessories that come with a mobile elevated work platform and the equipment associated with it, which could be all of the PPE type of devices, or whether there is guarding that is required around the base of the platform. So again, the action steps, understanding the difference in the MEWP categories and styles, understanding unit dimensions and measurements when planning the travel route where passage is restricted, understanding the unit specific specifications to determine if the machine is capable of doing what it needs to do, and the awareness of accessories and work equipment associated with that task. And with that, our resources to build on that are, again, the risk assessment best practice guide. We pointed out the specific areas within that to address this section and the MEWP selection. We have a MEWP selection checklist document that you can utilize to assist in the proper selection of it. We have a MEWP selection poster, so you understand the different categories, because you obviously need to have properly people trained in the categories of the MEWP that you're going to select. And we have posters to reinforce the ongoing understanding of all of the particular selection processes. Another critical part of the plan is the operator qualifications, training, and familiarization. So within this plan, obviously, we end up having operator training that's required, and that is on a general category of equipment. So here is an example, is 3As is a category of equipment. But once they're trained on it, there's a lot of different models, and they need to get model specific familiarization on the controls and operating characteristics of that machine. So how do we put that into our plan? Well, again, we need to ensure first that all of our personnel receive proper MEWP operator training, which includes both theoretical knowledge and practical hands-on operation for each MEWP category that you will expect them to operate. They need to ensure that the operation of the trained operators are then familiarized on the specific model machine that they're going to receive or be expected to operate. And once they're familiarized, the operator must be able to operate that new different model for a sufficient period of time to achieve proficiency in the operation of that before he begins doing the task. And they need to be assessed if the personnel are qualified to perform the task prior to authorization to operate. So again, you need to ensure that the MEWP operator provides instructions to occupants in the work platform as well, so they have the basic knowledge of how to work safely out of that MEWP platform. And that could potentially include how to use the emergency lowering of the MEWP as part of your rescue plan. And within that, we have the following resources that will help you build on this. First, you end up having the ANSI A92.22 and .24 Manual of Responsibilities, which covers all the information that they must be familiar with in terms of safe use and the training requirements within that. We end up having the IPAF MEWP training courses that can be made available. And we end up having a familiarization toolbox talk to make sure that people continue to understand that just because they were trained, they also need to be familiarized on each model that they're going to be going on. And then there's other documents throughout there, which is the IPAF logbook, which is the documentation of familiarization. So the next item that you have is the access, preparation, and maintenance of the site. So we've done the risk assessment where we've evaluated the site, but as we know, you have the ultimate responsibility to ensure the safety of the workers, and their supervisors must make sure that when they go to the job site, if there are changes that are in place, those things are identified. So supervisors of MEWP operators must ensure that the operators and occupants are aware of and comply with the requirements of the safe use as detailed in this program. So looking at the ground conditions that can change, what are some of the things that we need to do and take action steps? The MEWP supervisor must continually monitor all of the ground conditions. So we end up having the impact of weather, the impact of daily wind or thunderstorms, ground conditions. Are they adequate? Was excavation done in that site where we're traveling that may now not be compacted properly to support it? Are there things that are happening or changing on the job site that we need to be aware of? When we're traveling to and from the work area or within the work area, what potential things are there? Just looking at the locations where we're setting up, whether there's hazardous locations which are potentially flammable or explosive gases or particles in the air. What is the work area clear of personnel and equipment? Are we set up that we need to operate in potentially unusual operating conditions? So right now, you shouldn't be operating on a truck or a trailer or a floating vessel or on a scaffold or similar equipment unless the application is approved. So all of these elements are things that must be identified and part of your program. Moving overhead objects, is it cranes overhead? What else is occurring? Sometimes there's a mobile elevated work platform working over another one. So you need to be looking at all of these attributes in place, and then obviously the parking of it. So really, it really is saying what are the conditions that we need to make sure are in place and take care of it, and then the resources with it is the guidance for the assessment of ground conditions. We have Andy access posters and toolbox talks to refer to ground conditions. We have a spreader pad calculator. So if you have an outrigger based machine, making sure that you have the proper size pad underneath it and that it is located properly underneath your outrigger to put the load properly into it. We also have tools such as the workplace key tag inspections, and these particular devices really just have a checklist for an operator to refer to on doing their daily required workplace inspection. All right, now we have trained supervisors to evaluate operators. Here, this is a new term in the U.S. that we have MEWP supervisors. And we have a requirement to have trained and qualified supervisors to monitor the performance of the work of each operator to ensure their compliance with the standard. In the Canadian standards, we have many of the same requirements for the user, although we don't specifically have it. And we look at them being someone who is put in place to ensure that the user's responsibilities are addressed. So what are our action steps? Well, we need to have assigned personnel complete MEWP supervisor training, a new requirement in courses that are available in the marketplace. And that really establishes the knowledge for all of the rules and regulations that apply to mobile elevated work platforms and the proper selection of the equipment for the job. We need to establish pre-operation checklists that supervisors, operators, and occupants are aware of to ensure that they comply with the provisions in your safe use program. And then we need to establish a plan to evaluate MEWP operators on a regular basis to ensure their proficiency. So because an individual is trained, let's go over and say that he hasn't operated it in 6 months, and then we throw him back out into a job site. We need to define how the evaluations will be consistently applied, and what is to be measured and how you're going to document that. You need to define how the evaluations will be required, when are they required, ensure that they're scheduled and completed. And this should be included the use of VR simulators as a potential option for verifying and documenting proficiency. So the resources here again are IPAF training for MEWP courses, and that includes the MEWP supervisor. And you can see here is a reference to evaluation testing that is in the safe use standards in both the US and Canada, as to here are the items that you should be looking at to check. And all of these will be elements that will be in our resources and something that should be part of your safe use plan. While these machines are very well designed and manufactured, obviously these are mechanical devices, and there are very specific requirements for the maintenance, including inspections and repairs as required in the standards and by the manufacturer. So basically you end up having maintenance that is scheduled, pre-delivery inspections, frequent and annual inspections, and these are done by the owner of the equipment. When you're looking at some companies, they may be the owner of the equipment as well as the user of the equipment. The user of the equipment can be someone who rents the equipment only, in which case they have to do a daily pre-start inspection. And so you go through this list and look at maintenance and repair training. So the people who are doing this work have to be qualified. Maintenance and repair safety precautions. So there again, we end up having guidance on how they perform those tasks properly. When you're putting on parts, the parts that are replaced on it have to be equivalent to those required by the OEM, the original equipment manufacturer, and make sure that you end up addressing safety related bulletins. So if you're the owner of the equipment, you have to have a relationship with the manufacturer to get all the information on potential recalls. And then again, having manuals on the equipment are also important. So think about this in that context, that if I am if I'm developing my safe use program, if I own it, what are my responsibilities as an owner? So we kind of just summarized all of those elements. You need to make sure that's registered with the manufacturer, have the right maintenance manuals, all of these particular elements, maintenance, scheduled maintenance, frequent inspections, annual inspections, how do I perform my service repairs? All of those fall under the owner's responsibilities. But if you're a user of the equipment, just renting the equipment, you still need to do inspections to make sure that this equipment is operating properly. Although it was properly manufactured and properly maintained and serviced before you received it, you still need to do daily pre-start inspections. Again, daily pre-start inspections, which is both visual and function test, and identify any problems before they become an issue. You need to make sure that you do operational maintenance. You need to check the oil levels. You need to obviously make sure that it's properly fueled. If you get to the point where it's not properly fueled, you're up in the air and it runs out of fuel, now you have a operator who is potentially in the air who needs to be rescued. Assistance to operators, making sure that they know everything they need to know, and reporting problems, malfunctions to the owner of the equipment to ensure that those service inspections and maintenance repairs are done properly. So the resources we put over here is obviously the standards themselves. They have sections 4.5 and 5 that address this. You obviously have the manufacturer service and parts manuals for the particular model machine that you're dealing with. They need to be maintained by the owner. You have links to IPAF, boom, and vertical pre-start inspections that can give that ongoing guide on how to properly do those things. That is a complement to operator training. You have the IPAF pre-use inspection checklist. We have toolbox talks to reinforce this on an ongoing basis. And we also have guidance now for major inspections of mobile elevated work platforms. There's also a place in your plan for site-specific requirements. The site-specific requirements are things that may not be captured within your MEWP-specific safe-use program. They may be something that the building owner may require that goes beyond the considerations of what you would be doing in your MEWP-specific risk assessment planning. So here you need to make sure that if there are restrictions in the work area, so if you're working in a nuclear power plant, there may be some very specific things to that site that you wouldn't have necessarily in a general risk assessment plan. So these things are very important to make sure. There may be job sites that require you that you wear high visibility vest, foot protection, eye protection, all those elements. So you don't want to omit these things that are requirements for that job site safety, and make sure that you are pulling in site-specific requirements along the way. So you need to be aware of the site-specific requirements, ensure they're included in your site risk assessment, and ensure that all your personnel are aware of site-specific requirements and how to apply them in your method statements. So here, site-specific requirements must be added, and we're going to add a site-specific checklist for use within your plan. Another important element within the safe use program, and again, specific to MEWPs, is unauthorized use, protecting against unauthorized use. So MEWPs, mobile elevated work platforms, are under the care, custody, and control of MEWP users, the employers of the operators, and precautions must be taken to prevent unauthorized operation of this equipment. Guidance of MEWP for security must be provided to the operators to include that the operator must not provide this to any other person or entity without the authorization of the user employer. So there are guidance documents that are available to them. Here you can see that we have keys, but there's also now, with technology coming out, the ability to go out there and use telematics and having keypads on it that have unique numbers that only the assigned operator would have access to. So again, action steps: only trained persons, familiarized and authorized, are allowed. And you may consider creating a document for authorization to operate form. So only this operator has been approved to operate. So we'll have an authorization to operate form option. Authorized operators shall be instructed not to provide it to anyone else, and the user shall direct the operator to comply with the requirements. At a minimum, where it's possible, MEWPs should be parked in this designated area that are secure or supervised. And on completion, the MEWP shall be parked and designated, switched off, and lowered to its stowed position. Brakes applied if required, and the key shall not be left unattended. It should be with the operator. So here, the resources that go with this is our IPAF guidance on MEWP security and our Andy Access posters and toolbox talks on the prevention of unauthorized use. So as you can see, there are a lot of components that you may not have necessarily thought about when you're just saying, I'm going to rent this and get an operator trained. There are lots of attributes of safety that must be considered and part of your planning. Another critical component of this, obviously, is the safety of others. So while you can train and supervise your personnel, how are you going to ensure the safety of others, including the general public who may be just nearby the operation, or even inadvertently coming into the workplace that you have and will be exposed to potential harm in the place where you're working? Your plan must consider the safety of others in addition to your employees. Signage, as you can see here, is one way to try to prevent someone from going into the areas where they're not allowed. But again, so prevent others from entering your work area. How are we going to do that? Precautions when others are moving equipment or vehicles are present. So it's not just you, it's you moving in an area where others are working. The protection and warning of others in the proximity of the work area, properly secured tools and materials that can be safely handled by persons when working from the platform. We don't want to be dropping things on other people, and transporting to and from the site. Just those processes where you can be dropping it off on the roadside, and now we have vehicular traffic going by while you're offloading it. So we have lots of considerations and precautions that must be considered. And within that, our resources here we have what we call the IPAF Street Smart program. So how do we safely work when we're on or near roadways? We have a program on drop zones, being aware of falling objects for people working or coming below you when you're working. There's also a ANSI standard for the protection of the public on or adjacent to construction sites. So that may be considered within your evaluations. So you have these resources that are out there that you need to become aware of and consider within your program. And last but not least is documentation. It's always said from the legal community that if it's not in writing, it didn't necessarily happen. So here again, you're looking at lots of elements that are in this program. So you're looking at documentation, including lots of particular components in place. So let me see if I put this in here. Here we have the transfer of ownership. Document needs to be documented. Frequent and annual inspections needs to be documented. Pre-delivery preparation, service, and repairs needs to be documented. Training and familiarization. So the operator evaluations are accomplished through visual evaluations need to be in there. And training test, as well as documentations for the persons trained, all need to be documented. And even though there's an annex within the training standard, and the annexes are non-mandatory, keep in mind that those annexes that are in there for reference really provide a good reference and guidance on the type of documentation that you should consider. So again, transfer of ownership, frequent annual inspections. We will have all of these guidance documents available for you to provide the information that you need. IPAF is ultimately creating a app now for operator logging and familiarization of all the times that they're familiarized and work that they're doing. So again, there's manual tools, and there's now going to be electronic tools for you to be using. So be aware what those tools are in the marketplace. So again, developing your, developing your whole program. So we are trying to create, again, tools to assist you in doing this. And we can attest as trying to have created a guidebook for you to do this, that there's the opportunity for things to be missed. And that's why we thought that it was important for us to really come out there and provide you with the tools to do this. So here you see an example of what a safe use program could look like. And this is just a couple of pages in here, and I'm going to go through this in more detail in a second. But here you can see what we're going to do is provide you with a guidebook on how to create one. And we are also going to create a sample MEWP safe use program that's going to give a lot of details in here that you can consider plagiarizing without any concern of us coming out as a copyright document, because these are going to be out here for all users to utilize and improve the safety on your job sites. One tool that's out there that you could all look at securing is making sure that you have a copy of the standards. And the most inexpensive way of doing that in the US is buying a copy of the Manual of Responsibilities, which is an exact copy of the responsibilities for users for the safe use and training standards. And as you can see, it's a whopping $8 cost plus shipping, and you can go to the Secretariat of the ANSI A92 standards, the SAIA. Here's the link to that, and buy that, and it has all of the elements and requirements that should be considered as part of your program. Unfortunately, this became a bigger challenge for us to complete than we wanted to admit. And here I'm going to scroll through. This is really the Safe Use Program Guide document. So you can see me throwing through there. Here's the equipment selection, action steps for that, documents with it. Here's the topic, action steps, resources, topic, action step, resources, topic, action step, resources for all of the topics that are in that cloud that are the elements that are to be considered part of your plan. We have not completed this. We had hoped to be done by today with the presentation. And while we have the lion's share of the work done, we still want to go through and do some editing of this as well. In addition to that, we are also creating from that the sample safe use program. So here, look at the table of contents of what's in here. And then you go through the table of contents, and obviously we end up having all the information. So, sorry, I want to go back to that. So there's a lot of information that will be in here that, as I said, can be too much for some, and maybe exactly what others people need. And again, you may need to go in here and tailor this, cut and paste to use these documents. But our thorough hope is that the tools that we're going to be providing, which is the guide and then a sample safe use program, will provide all MEWP users the accessibility and understanding of how to most effectively protect their workers through all of the requirements and responsibilities that they have in all of these programs for the safe use and operation of the equipment. So with that, I have completed our presentation, and we are going to leave ourselves up for Q&A. And Diego, I don't know if you want to share this or you want me to just pop into the Q&As.
Hi, Tony, can you hear me?
I can.
Great. So we have just a couple of questions here on Zoom platform. And I don't know if you can see them in the system, Tony, at the bottom. It says Q&A.
I will open them up.
It's gonna be easier for we have a question from Pat Schmetzer and Damon Rossler.
Okay, I am asked about retention of training documents. Does the entity conducting the training need to keep those documents, or should the user save or retain these documents, or both? The answer by standards is that in the Canadian standards, that requirement to maintain them is by the person delivering them. And in the US ANSI standards, the documentation of them is typically kept by the deliverer, but the user can also request a copy of those for their records. So hopefully that answered that. And are they making any updates for fall protection requirements on scissor lifts? Well, the answer there is the standards are drafted. There are no new requirements in either the Canadian or the US ANSI standards. The requirements basically are that you are required to be wearing personal fall protection when you're on a boom type lift. So it's a group B machine. You're required to be wearing it at all times. And when you're on a scissor lift or a vertical type lift, a group A machine, you're not specifically required to wear it unless a risk assessment identifies a cause for you to be wearing it. So an example is if I'm in a position where I'm trying to do a task and I may be required to do what would be considered overreaching, there is a situation where a site risk assessment would require the use of personal fall protection on a scissor lift. But there is no specific requirements in the US to do that. To give you a corresponding view of that, in the Canadian standards, you are required to be wearing fall protection on all MEWPs when they're in motion. So kind of gives you a different perspective. And then I'll add into that site-specific requirement. There are many sites that you could go on to. I know there are some industrial sites that say, whenever you're on a mobile elevated work platform on our site, you're required to be wearing personal fall protection. So there could be site-specific requirements that would mandate that you're wearing those. But there are no regulatory or changes in the standards to address that beyond what I just stated. Does the plan cover the use of harness, life vest when using a MEWP? The answer is your plan likely should if you are in those positions. We as IPAF have had guidance documents when you're working over water. So again, you're always required to be wearing it. There is language from OSHA on a letter of interpretation on working over water using an aerial work platform. And in those particular cases, you may be with a risk assessment identifying that if by chance the lift went over, it went into the water, the person should be wearing a flotation device. Unfortunately, you know, the risk here was that the MEWPs went over, which is a different hazard. So technically wearing fall protection at any point in time shouldn't be an issue. But if the lift went over, and there have been situations where they have gone over, working over water, being connected to it, the persons were submerged, connected, couldn't disconnect, and fatalities did occur, a risk assessment could identify those and provide a different approach to it. But regulatorily, there is no changes to the requirement to be wearing them on all boom type lifts and not specifically required on scissor lifts. Is training still every 3 years? The answer is that training, retraining is actually not specifically specified by terms in the standards. It is referenced in the Canadian standards that the term of operator training cannot exceed 5 years. The US standards really specifically point to occasions where retraining would be required. One would be the expiration of the training period. There are companies who provide training, and there's a 3-year period. I know that IPAF has had for a long period of time a 5-year term where our training would be required to be redone. So those are the two typical terms, is a 3-year or 5-year, but there is no specific requirement in the standards outside of if the person delivering the training has an expiration on it, if there's a period of time that through observation, the proficiency has slipped, they may be required to do retraining. If there's new technology, retraining could be required. So there are specific examples in the standard where training would be required and should be incorporated into your program. Again, one of the things in the ANSI standard and the Canadian standard is that operators must be evaluated on an ongoing basis. So the identification of proficient or lack of proficiency would be another trigger for retraining to occur.
I think that's all the questions for now, Tony. I don't know if anybody else has any another question on. If you do, we can answer them later because we are right on time, Tony.
Okay, well, the one thing that I would state is that this program, this guidance document, and sample safe use program that we're developing are not completed at this moment, but we are getting close to it. My expectation is hopefully we'll have documents on site within about a month. We have a very robust program. In fact, as I was going through the creation of this presentation, I identified an area that we needed to add. So we want to make sure that what we provide is thorough and complete, that it addresses all of the requirements that are stipulated in our industry standards in both the US and Canada. Know that for the most part, we will address the requirements by the strictest requirement. So if it's has a stricter requirement in the US or Canada or vice versa, we will generally gravitate to those unless there is a regulatory reason not to. So that kind of approaches our approach to this. So again, we thank you for your time today. We hope that this will allow you to be safe and be prepared. You have my contact information and some information from IPAF, some of our resources that you can look at for some immediate reviews. And when we get this on site, you can go to our website, www.ipaf.org, and do a search on MEWP Specific Safe-Use Program, and it'll take you to our documents once we get them on the website. And it would be my expectation for all those who have registered, we will send you an email letting you know when they're on site as well. So again, thank you. A hearty thank you to our sponsors, Skyjack and TVH Parts, who assisted making these presentations possible. A hearty thank you to those. And again, thank you all for your attention during this presentation today.